right, we're so excited to talk to you today, Brian.
So excited to be here.
I was so happy to meet you and to learn just a little bit more about your story and your journey, and I just couldn't wait to make sure that we allowed other people to hear more about you, to learn more about your journey, and learn specifically how you have prioritized equity in
Yes.
your work, in your life, in the things you're committed to. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more about you today.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I appreciate it. I think every time I meet like a kindred spirit, like anybody in the speaking, coaching, leadership realm, it's always cool to get like an inside peek into their world and see where the synergies match up. So I'm excited about the conversation.
Absolutely. So I know you're from Baltimore.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. So I was the kid that grew up watching the NASA space shuttle launches on television. So despite my career ambition today, my original goal was to be an aerospace engineer.
Okay.
And so you see what Elon Musk is running around doing. You
Yes.
know, that was like kind of my dream. Like part Iron Man, part engineer. Like even to this day, I love anything with an engine. And so I was the little kid taking things apart in my bedroom, not putting them back together, but taking them apart and just trying to figure out like how things work. So I've always been like really intellectually curious. But I come from a small family, great mom, did an incredible job raising me. West Baltimore, born and raised on the playgrounds where I spend most of my days, honestly. But I had a really great upbringing, one older brother, and so essentially I set out on this path to, get into like science, engineering, technology, and I made it all the way through school. I got accepted to, my mom's goal for me was like, finish school, like, don't get arrested, and like...
Those are important goals.
yeah, don't have no kids, like early or whatever. So I like, check, perfect. But I ended up going to college. There was no college fund to speak of. I'm first generation like college student, so she was so proud to kind of get me to that point. But then it was up to me to figure out like the next steps. And so thanks to a series of events, I actually ended up at Baltimore City Community College for my first 2 years of school. The reason I ended up there was a woman by the name of Crystal and Bowie, who kind of became my second mother. And so I know some people may be familiar with that name. She was a lifelong educator in the city of Baltimore. She went on to be area superintendent. She retired and then came back out of retirement to take on this director of what was called the Graham T. Woods College Program at Baltimore City Community College. And so here I am in college going through this amazing program. They gave me a laptop computer. I had my first plane ride for study abroad. We ended up going to Seville, Spain for a summer, and it was just like a breath of fresh air of experiences. But little did I know what was waiting for me, because this whole time I was trying to get ready to be this amazing engineer, but yet I had this one little class waiting for me when I ended up making it to Morgan, and that was Calculus 2. So, I don't know, did you take like...
I did. Was that your nemesis at Morgan?
Oh my gosh. It was just it still is to this day.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Sounds like trauma.
A little bit. But no, it was just like, I had struggled with math consistently throughout my entire, and it all builds on each other. It doesn't get like any easier. And so I do remember like taking the test and actually putting the test down, and like 30 minutes had gone by and nothing was on the paper. So I put the test down and I was like looking out the window, like almost for inspiration. And I said, God, if you can just get me through this one test, I'll make it. And it was like almost like the clouds parted, and the answer to the test was like on the side of the building. And the building I saw was the Earl G. Graves School of Business and Management. So I put the test down, left engineering school, and went and signed up for business. That's how I like to think.
That is amazing. Also, Earl Graves is one of my superheroes, so that is so amazing.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you define success on your own terms, and I love that. You also uplifted a very well-known Zig Ziglar quote. It's not where you start, it's where you finish that counts. Explain to us what that means to you.
Yeah, well, I think this is part of the example, because, I started on this one path to, essentially be an engineer, and now I'm running, Black Speakers Network. And by the way, part of my way I self-identify is a certified introvert. So when it comes to speaking, presenting, getting in front of an audience, back in college, I couldn't lead two people in silent prayer, like let alone try to lead an
You
audience.
couldn't lead them in silent prayer.
Could
That's rough.
Could not do it. I was like, I did not want to talk to people. I didn't want to be. So I saw this opportunity, this shift, and I think a lot of people kind of go into college with that mentality. I don't know the stats, but I know a lot of people end up changing majors multiple times.
I changed mine once.
Yeah, because it's like, how do you know what you're going to do at 18? So.
And then sometimes you just need to get out too, and so there's that.
Yeah, it's like all these different things happen, and so I do believe that it's not where you start or where you finish. Like, I think that we have to allow room for flexibility, and we have to allow room for the people resources and the things that are going to essentially change the trajectory of our life come into play and be attuned to those things. So in my particular case, I didn't know what path I was going to lead down. Like, I didn't have this like, oh, I'm going to go be an entrepreneur now. Oh, I'm going to go cut hair or whatever. I just knew like directionally what felt right. And so leaning into that is what really like helped me kind of forge the path forward.
So you already mentioned one of your heroes that clearly changed the trajectory of your life. Who are your other mentors? Who have you looked up to? Who have you gotten inspiration from?
So many. So one of my earliest mentors is actually a guy, a speaker. His name is Craig Valentine. One of the reasons I started Black Speakers Network was to create diversity in the speaker world. So we'll get to that soon. But I know Craig, he actually is a homegrown hero for me.
Okay.
For starters, we're both like 6'2", so we kind of stand out. And I think, in a certain sense, I know my grandfather was tall too. I'm actually named after my grandfather, like Brian James Olds. He was James Olds. So I think part of my legacy was meant to, stand out a little bit in that way. And when I saw Craig speak for the first time, actually at a Toastmasters conference, I knew that, wow, like, that's what like I want to do, like to be able to command a room, to be able to, essentially carry an audience in the palm of your hand and create just fill the room with a sense of optimism and be able to transform people in such a powerful way. I've never seen anything like it, and he was like so personable. So Craig Valentine was definitely the person that I essentially modeled my early speaking path around, and essentially that became one of my go-to people. But I've always had like mentors from afar. I think sometimes like you can just get indoctrinated into people's thought process without ever meeting them. Now I do meet Craig, like I have his phone number, and I just ran into him in the airport a couple of weeks ago. But there's so many people, Damon John, for example, on the entrepreneurship side, just seeing people like take, just a little ball of opportunity and a little bit of money and scale it into something that is, a global brand is incredibly impressive to me. So I've had so many people over the years that I've just essentially, read their books or just voraciously like listened to their podcasts. Haven't met them, they have no idea like the impact that they've had on me, but have certainly helped to carve the path that I've taken today.
That is wonderful. So ABC, we are focuses on racial equity. We're looking to help dismantle some of the barriers that have been created by systemic racism. And I would like to ask you a little bit about race and how race has showed up in your personal life and in your career, and how you've navigated race specifically in your journey.
Yeah, so I mean, the interesting thing is that I feel like growing up in Baltimore, you're somewhat in a microcosm. And I do remember, going to elementary school, and it was almost predominantly Black. Like, I don't think I met like a white person until I actually went to middle school. And the reason for that—
That is amazing.
Right. Or any other race, So I do remember specifically making friends with like white kids in middle school, because we moved from West Baltimore to Arbutus, which is more diverse. And then same thing in high school, we moved back to West Baltimore, but I ended up going to a school in East Baltimore called Murrayville for the homegrown people. So,
Yes. Some people cheering.
yeah, go Mustangs. But so for me, it was kind of like there's so many like light bulb moments where I feel like I enjoyed a childhood where race for the most part did not come up as often, but there were so many moments going into um, high school as a teenager, and certainly coming out through college and into the professional world where I realized like, oh, I can't move the same way, or the rules are a little bit different. You have to pay attention to how you talk to police. You have to pay attention to try to not look suspicious when you are just minding your business, like walking through a mall and stuff like that. The clothing that you wear may attract like the wrong type of attention. So all these different things. And in my particular case, the interesting thing is that I mentioned, I was named after my grandfather, but I didn't grow up with a dad. So my mom, I feel like, did the best she could to create an environment and instill me with like common sense and street smarts. But she's not everywhere, and so like there's situations that come up that are always going to challenge, and you have to decide in the moment what are you going to do. And so I think for me, like growing up as a black kid in Baltimore gave me like a really unique perspective that manifests in two different ways. And I think that when you get out into the quote unquote real world, you kind of have a choice to make. You can there's things about my culture, my upbringing that I'm incredibly proud of, that I can lean into and that are inextricably part of Brian, that essentially make me who I am. And then there's also this pressure sometimes to assimilate and to downplay and code switch and do all these other things that make you less threatening or more appetizing to the majority. And so I think early in my career, that's something that I struggled with. Is like what is that identity? How much am I going to let like external people or factors shape that? And that's something that I think I see a lot of people that look like me continue to deal with.
So when we talk about equity and racial equity specifically, what does that mean to you? What does a world with racial equity look like to you?
Gosh, I mean, I think it's really challenging for me to put even when I think about when I try to form a clear mental picture of exactly what that looks like, it's really challenging because it seems so idealized. I think that there are unique opportunities to create equity within specific spaces, and so what I would love to see is everybody getting the same education opportunity, everybody getting the same healthcare treatment, everybody regardless of race or gender or anything else, having the same amount of pay, based on the job that they're performing, and so things like that. I would like to see a world where a interaction with the law enforcement ends peacefully, regardless of the color of your skin. And so things like that are immediately become top of mind. And in Black Speakers Network, we're constantly having conversations about what does that look like in those individual silos. We know that with Black women specifically, maternity, the mortality rate for Black mothers is a lot higher, simply because of these like long held beliefs that Black women can take more pain. And so I would love to erase that and create a world where people are essentially going back to Martin Luther King, judged by the content of their character. And so it sounds like somebody listening to this may say, oh, well, that sounds like a utopia, but I do think that when you are born and you come into this world, most people come in as a blank slate. Like you learn to hate, you learn bias, you learn prejudice, you learn bigotry. Like those things aren't like instilled into your DNA. And so I think, anything that can be learned can essentially be unlearned over a period of time.
Amen. Let's talk about Black Speakers Network. Your website says that it exists to help speakers reach people, to activate their confidence and let their voices be heard. So tell us a little bit more about that work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started Black Speakers Network in 2016. It was born out of a need to create more.
The introvert did this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It was good. What happened was I mentioned about my Toastmaster journey, and that's kind of what got me over the hump of speaking. And then I realized that there was this broader world of professional speaking that when I just did a cursory scan around, it seemed like Black people were underrepresented. Now, whether we were or not may not have necessarily been the case, but it's just the spaces that I was showing up in. It just seemed like particularly coming from an HBCU, we throw a little hot sauce on everything. So I'm like, there has to be more. We had this dynamic group of young, Black men and women at Morgan State University speaking, and I wanted to see that same energy and that same opportunity replicated out in the marketplace. And so not seeing that, just like with any product or service, like any entrepreneur, if you don't see it, you
saw the gap.
You build,
Yes.
you build it. And so that's what happened. So 2016 started Black Speakers Network. The mission was to equip, connect, and inspire the next generation of Black professional speakers. And so to this day, that really boils down to three main things that we work with. So anybody that's a current or aspiring professional speaker, which most people who are speakers are really part-time. So they are speaking as even an extension of their role in their career, or they are entrepreneurs that may be speaking as a marketing strategy for their business. And then some have, of course, like personal brands or creators, or are becoming known as thought leaders, for whatever it is that they do. But regardless, we're there to provide three things: training and resources. And so, making sure that speakers have the tools necessary, because there's no, degree of professional speaking. You have to kind of, it's like OJT, on-the-job training. So that's why we created resources like Speak Up, and, this model of helping speakers understand what it takes to actually succeed in this industry. Because, if somebody wants to just, speak a couple times a year, or just as a function of their job, you probably don't need much help. But if you're really looking to get in front of a specific audience, and you have a message, and you're trying to really make a name for yourself as a speaker, then it takes some intentional steps in order to do that. And so we provide the training, we provide resources, things like websites and videography, photography, speech coaching, and things to help speakers kind of sharpen their skills along the way. And then lastly, what everybody's looking for is, of course, opportunity. And so how do we create more visibility? How do we get more speakers on stage? And so part of our objective is to curate speaking opportunities that are out in the marketplace and introduce them to our members. And so that includes everything from keynote speaking to MC hosting, meeting facilitation, training, the list goes on. And so we want to be able to bring those opportunities to our members, as well as create our own stages for speakers to be able to share their message.
I mean, it sounds like you have created significant opportunity for the Black community specifically that didn't exist prior. And you spoke about being intentional. So my question, and probably the question others might have, is you had to be extremely intentional to designate your Black-led business to be specifically for Black people.
Yes. Yeah, there was a time, now we're in kind of the post George Floyd, era as we record this, but I think that when I started in 2016, there were some questions around like, are you sure you want to be Black Speakers Network? You sure you don't want to do like All-Star Speaker Network or Global Speaker Network? And I was like, no, it's Black Speakers Network.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be unapologetic. And I think that actually, helped from a marketing perspective for us, and also to ultimately reach, our target audience, because, when people come to our properties website, we have 16,000 folks in our community right now. It's there's no question, like Black Speakers Network, even if you don't know what we do or any of the stuff we explain, you can self-identify in the name alone.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a very, very powerful tool from a marketing perspective for any business. Like if your target audience can self-identify just with the name of your company or your brand or your tagline, that's going to be a powerful tool. And we've since, we just got the trademark this past year, so super excited to continue with that. But it was very important to me that we not water it down.
Yes.
But the other is true too. So I'll share a quick fun fact. So when I was working in corporate America, I had an opportunity to work with an organization called the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, also known as SHIP. Incredible organization. And so SHIP is, as you mentioned, as I told you, I'm not an engineer.
Right.
And as you can see, I'm not Hispanic or Latino. So, but I am a lifetime member of that organization as a result of, the work that I was doing with them. And so I really embraced their approach when it came to being inclusive. So we're not anti-white. We're not, we're not prohibiting anybody from joining. We don't discriminate. But, when you come to Black Speakers Network, everything that we are doing is going to be unapologetically, Black. We are there to essentially put more Black speakers on stages than any other organization on the planet, and that's what we're going to focus on. But if somebody that doesn't identify as Black African American wants to join, then they're most welcome to.
Okay.
But it doesn't shift the focus.
That's interesting. One of the questions I had to ask you were how you engaged, or if you engaged with other communities from different racial backgrounds, either as participants in the work or as advisors to make sure their perspectives were included in your work. Not that that's mandatory, but just an interesting thought.
Because what ultimately happens is, so we have 16,000 people essentially looking to speak on stages in different capacities, and just because we're a Black Speakers Network, our speakers audience, like the audience that our speakers are focused on, aren't exclusively Black.
Right.
They're just Black. So we from as it relates to corporate partners, great organization partners like ABC, and the world at large, the idea is to be able to build bridges, not erect walls, to create that type of synergistic. Like, we need everybody. We need to have relationships with meeting planners, podcasters, event organizers, folks who are leading change management programs across organizations. And so that part externally doesn't matter, but we just want you to know from a development perspective, we want to be stay particularly attuned to the needs of our core audience, which are people who identify as Black.
So I know that also very inclusive is a subject matter that the speakers may be tasked to present on, and I'm wondering, 16,000 Black people equipped and ready and prepared to lift their voice, to have their voice amplified on some subject matter. How much of that do you feel is a byproduct of how the world is and people feeling like they want to be heard or want to contribute? How much of that, for Black people in particular, is relative to a thought that the time is now and we really need to be included? We need to have a say and a voice at the table.
Yeah, I do think that that's part of it. I think we live in such interesting times right now where we are the recipients of kind of decades of progress across multiple fronts, whether it be civil rights or technology. 25 years ago, you couldn't put up a camera and talk to a million people.
Right.
If you weren't ABC, Fox, NBC, one of the big, there was no way to reach that many people. And now with technology, you can. And so just that shift alone has essentially leveled the playing field a little bit and has allowed so many more people to go direct to consumer, with their message without having to gatekeep through some of the more institutional things like radio and television. was it when it
Yes.
came to like broadcasting, getting your message out there, and of course, written word, of course, but even now with things like direct publishing, and I could write a book this weekend and get it out. It's not difficult. Audiobooks, same thing. So there's so many mediums. Like we just started a podcast. You could start a podcast in a weekend now, and so
You can go live.
You can go live. It's like pick your medium,
Your platform, right?
and then run with it. And that didn't exist. I think we're kind of numb to it now, but everything I just mentioned was not possible like 2 decades ago in the way that it is now. So I think that's part of it. I think just historically and as a culture, Black people, we're storytellers. Like at the end of the day, we have this powerful oral tradition of being able to teach, our children, our family, our communities through the power of stories. Like everybody's family has a story of what their uncle, their grandmother, they did, the cautionary tales, and I think that's very, very important. And so while we value those stories in our community, internally, there's also, I think, we've started to recognize the power of our voice externally. And part of that is there's so many, it's very nuanced because in many Black households, I know in mine, it's kind of like, all right, some stuff don't leave this house.
Stays in the house.
You
Oh
see what I'm
yes,
saying?
yeah. That must be every Black house.
It's every house, and, don't touch the thermostat.
And honestly,
don't be running in and out.
not to interrupt you, but it makes it hard in some cases because that's cultural.
Yes.
For us to be free sometimes to tell our own stories and to articulate our journeys because of that.
That's what I'm saying. So it's a lot of, sometimes there's trauma, potentially in that, depending on your situation. And so I do think part of it is to speak is a healing process for some, while it's also an opportunity to shine a light to help others move forward in that same way.
Yes, I love that. So, that ABC is very concerned about racial equity in entrepreneurship, in the workforce ecosystem, and you're a Black business owner, a successful Black business owner, and I'm assuming that you haven't been left out of the trials of having limited access to resources or limited access to supportive networks, or maybe having experienced discrimination in lending or other facets of your business. How has all of that shown up being, founder, CEO of this organization? Do you feel like some of your opportunities have been limited because of race?
Potentially, but here's the thing that I really enjoy about being an entrepreneur. There's like 1,000 ways to get the job done. You know what I'm saying? So, and again, it's true to our story. When a door closes, there's like a window, there's a wall. If the wall is thin enough, you can bust through it.
Is that what we're doing?
So my company, we're an LLC, and we're not venture backed or anything like that. I grew it essentially by my own funding.
Sweat equity, right?
Yeah. My first job was my first client.
Your funding?
Yeah,
Okay.
my funding, and then took it from there. So I've had opportunities with smaller like loans and stuff through Stripe and things of that nature. But like I think that holistically, sometimes it can be funding can be like a double-edged sword, and some of the opportunities are as well. So we've heard so many stories where companies and founders get this like large windfall of money, when it was flowing, not so much today, but like when so many checks were being cut, and then you're like trying to figure out where that money went 18 months later. On my side, I'm forced to be a lot more a better steward, and
You gotta keep your hustle up. Right?
keep the hustle up, and just be like more strategic about where those funds are deployed. And I think slow growth isn't necessarily bad growth, because it becomes sustainable. And the lessons that you learned trying to take a company from 0 to your first 6-7 figures, those same lessons will serve you to 8, 9. So I don't have any ill, like, I don't have any, negative feeling toward being like locked out of funding and stuff like that. I remember when the pandemic first kicked off, and the PPP program was at its height, and everybody and their mother was getting like funding.
Getting rescued, right? You weren't eligible for those?
I didn't end up getting one.
Okay.
But I do think that that provided an incredibly important lifeline for so many entrepreneurs to be able to kind of keep the lights on and keep operations going. And so for the members in our in our ecosystem, part of what we try to do is be a resource hub as well, just like ABC. So we hear about grant programs, share it out. We hear about resources for folks that to be able to, particularly grants, or in case loan forgiveness. Those are very, very powerful programs. So even though we personally directly didn't get one, I think that making sure that our people have the information and the resources to be able to take advantage of those programs in the legal and the smart way is very, very important. And so I don't have any. If I had to rewrite my entire journey again from 2016, I really wouldn't change anything. I think there have been a lot of character building moments building this business. I've had to figure out how to build teams from scratch. I've had to figure out systems, tools, technology. I've had to figure out product market fit, and it's a journey that I think every entrepreneur takes. And so I think sometimes the mentality is that money is going to, writing a check is going to solve all these business problems. It's not necessarily the case. Some things, it literally takes time, creativity, and getting the right people on board in order to move the needle forward.
So I know when we first had our introductory conversation, I remember listening to you and asking you, wait, you do this full time? This is your thing? And you were like, yeah, I do this full time.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the leap from the stability of perceived stability, right, of a full-time job working for someone else to really making the shift and decision to do this for yourself and let this be your thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a little bit of non-traditional experience. I worked for the same, particularly with millennials, right? Because typically we're changing jobs every 2 years.
Yeah.
I worked for the same company for 11 years. I had one professional job outside of college, and then ran BSN. And so for me, I had different roles during that period. I worked for a staffing and recruiting agency, so I moved from doing, accounts receivable to doing training and development, instructional design, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so in the midst of that, I started Black Speakers Network, and so I was essentially working, like most people who are, we call it dualpreneurs, nights and weekends, essentially. And so during that process, I was always focused on an exit, an exit strategy to go full time. And so my code name for actually leaving corporate America was called Tuesdays at 10. I call it Tuesdays at 10 because, sometimes people have Mondays off. Sometimes they have Fridays off, but it's kind of rare to be out doing things on a Tuesday, a random Tuesday.
Okay.
And so I really wanted to just have control over my Tuesdays, specifically at 10 o'clock. So that's the best time to go to Target. It's the best time to
At night, 10 o'clock at night?
No, in the morning.
Oh, in the morning.
Yeah,
so while you were supposed to be on your job, or do you?
Yeah, so the rationale is once I was able to go full time as an entrepreneur, Tuesday at 10, I'll be able to essentially
have your free time.
Right.
Okay, so that was your goal. You put the objective out in front of you so that you had something to look forward to.
Exactly.
Okay.
That was my code name Tuesdays at 10.
One day we'll talk about how I also very entrepreneurial and walked off my job, and less than a year later I had to go back, but that's for another day. But I'm very excited about how you purposely planned your exit and prepared yourself and made sure that what you needed to be in alignment was there.
Yes. So from a business perspective, once the roadmap was set, it's really paint by numbers. I working with a financial advisor, and he's like, well, you probably want to have about 6 months of runway, or emergency funds. You probably want to have pay down debt as much as possible. I was moving at the time, so it was you probably want to figure that out. And there's a perfect way to do it, and there's a kind of a wrong way to do it. I think or explicitly wrong with it.
Yeah.
I think mine was like somewhere in
Somewhere
the middle.
But there's never the right time to do it.
Right. So
you just have to jump, right?
You as a jump, like the Steve Harvey quote. He's like, pull the parachute and it will open and you will land. Now, some much you might be like, all right, I don't know if you might look outside your car is on its way gone, but that never happened for me. I think in general, I think one of the beautiful parts about building a company like BSN is that we were aggressively focused on monthly reoccurring revenue, right? And so that being a measuring stick, it wasn't feast or famine. So I knew that if we're going from 8,000 a month to 9,000, 10,000, 11,000, typically we're not going that far backwards unless the bottom fell out of the economy. So it was easy to predict when I could comfortably make that exit. And actually, the time that I did it, it wasn't even my actual projected time again, but just like as things were, sometimes in life you just feel like a shifting, right? And it's almost like intuition picks up where information drops off. And so for me, it was like, even though the numbers were, I probably could have comfortably stayed in my job for like another 6 to 12 months before making that transition. But from a timing perspective, it was almost ideal because that was the same time that the Speak Up book came out. And so had I not left, we probably would have only did, we had one kind of book launch plan for the Baltimore area, and that would have been fine. Nobody would have said anything about it. But instead, it's freeing up that time, not just the Tuesdays, but the rest of the days as well. We ended up going to like 7 or 8 different cities that year. Went to Black Enterprise, went to the West Coast, went to Chicago, and so there's an opportunity cost associated with everything that we do. And so I think part of making that leap is not only just looking at what's in the bank account, but also looking at what could be there, and not just from a monetary perspective, but also looking at what could be built during that time, because we only have a finite amount of time, energy, and money, and most of us just focus on like the money, but energy is important too. Like you can't, it's
experiences and time with people you love, and all those things are equally.
Yeah, like you can't. Sometimes you don't have it. Like if you work a full day, and let's say you get home at like 8 o'clock, and then you have to kind of switch into business mode. My business hours during the week were kind of like 8 p.m. to like midnight, and then you like wake up and do it all over again. You don't always have the creative energy, and once your creative energy is gone, it's gone.
Right, you're not able to show up as your best self. So I have a question, because you seem very, very humble. But I want to know if you have ever really thought about the magnitude of how you are showing up as a champion for the Black community. Have you really?
Have I thought about it?
Yeah, have you really stopped to consider 16,000 people who you've given opportunity, hope, promise, a platform to? Have you really considered the true impact of your work, regardless of the performance of the business, just the true impact of your work in the Black community?
No. I think it's part of what I appreciate, and from a legacy perspective is, having like work speak for itself. Like I've never been the type that's like, hey,
look at me.
And even now, I still identify as like a semi-retired speaker, because like the reality is, I'll do things like this or, speak on stages and stuff like that, but I'm really good behind the scenes. Like I like strategy, I like building systems, I like, creating opportunity. I think give people a room to step into, a table to sit down at, and let smart people do what they do and then move out the way. That's kind of like the season of life that I'm in. But, I do appreciate that. I think, my community is extremely vocal, even people outside of BSN who either benefited or just watched our growth.
Watched you,
Yeah, they definitely have made me feel really honored and special around that. That's how I got like the honorary doctorate, thanks to Dr. Will Moreland, who like nominated me for that. We got just different awards over the years, and just recognition by organizations in Baltimore and throughout. So I don't really. I think that anytime that I see a speaker like winning out in the marketplace, speaking on a podcast, crushing a panel, jumping on a plane to go keynote somewhere, like that to me is kind of that's like all the validation that we kind of need.
So I really, and I'm sure you do too, I believe in the power of having oratorical skills, specifically from a young age. I think it can open so many doors and opportunities, and even with my own children, I've prioritized that, and I believe my oldest son has had opportunities open because of his acumen for being able to speak publicly. How do you infuse this into young people's lives? How do you get this to be a priority earlier, or an opportunity for them to develop this skill set? And then how essential do you think it is for success?
Well, I think speaking in general, even outside the context of professional speaking, but just the confidence associated with being able to look somebody in the eye, deliver a message, stand in front of an audience, communicate an idea is priceless. Is literally priceless. One of my favorite shows is Shark Tank, of course, and within Shark Tank you see people literally sharing their life dream, and like 5 minutes or less. It's longer, but they cut it down. But it's you see people, the culmination of, in some cases, their life's work being showcased in that way, and I think that represents a microcosm of, if you want to put a definition around the American dream, is that it's having the freedom to be able to go after the things that you believe in, and speaking is a big part of that. I can't really think of any profession where speaking isn't going to help you. Now, going back to the kids,
yes,
the babies. Now, in their particular case, I remember competing in a Martin Luther King oratory contest in 5th grade. And
was it the WJZ contest?
It might have been. I was
like, my son did that 2 years in a row, so I'm very familiar with that.
It's
Baltimore, so.
Yeah. I don't remember if they, but they did it at the school, and I won. And I actually forgot about this. And
wow.
I think the reason I won is because I was like the loudest. And it was like my teacher was like, just command. And I was like, okay, and I won. But I think the confidence associated with that is key. And so the entire world runs on people. Like, we can start businesses all day long, sell products, sell services. It doesn't really matter. On the end of every transaction, there's a person, right? And so your ability to influence is tied to your ability to communicate. And obviously we have written and verbal communication. The crazy part about speaking is that they complement each other. So, if you want to become a better speaker, become a better writer, and vice versa. And so I think for students, K through 12, and I think part of the challenge that, and I'm sure you've heard this criticism of speaking, it's always touted as like the number one fear of people. Like, people would rather,
do anything
yeah.
to stand up and have to, present. Yes.
Yeah, the old Jerry Seinfeld is like, I'd rather be in a casket than, delivering a eulogy, So I think children, unfortunately, with the current system, in a lot of cases, there's a little bit of trauma built around speaking, because instead of it being infused into our just kind of everyday, making it more natural for kids and accessible, it's like everybody's afraid of like the public speaking class, or standing up, or that group project report and stuff like that. So I think if we can make strides to make number one, help communicate why speaking is so critically important, and then two, just make it fun.
Yes.
And so one of my favorite partnerships that we've had for the last 3 years is with the Baltimore Urban Alliance.
Okay.
And of course, Urban Alliance is a national organization, but we partner with Baltimore, and I've been working with them for years. They have an annual public speaking challenge that they do with their cohort. They provide youth internships for high school age students, paid internships, and at the culmination of their internship experience, they have to speak and talk about what they did in their roles, and there's opportunity to come in as coaches and provide feedback to the students and help them prep their presentation. And all that has been incredibly valuable because I do remember, again, certified introvert,
Yes.
skinny kid from Baltimore, couldn't lead 2 people in silent prayer. Like, I was not trying to get in front of an audience and talk. And I think now it's particularly more challenging because Gen Z is, they're born with a cell phone and a tablet in their hand. So why would I
mean, it's really cross-generational, right? Like, I come from the generation of be seen and not heard, right? And so then that also sets you up to not necessarily be the most vocal or be willing to, step into the power of articulation. And now, yes, we have children who are tied to their devices, and also, guess what? We have AI now, right? And so I'm someone, I've had the blessing of being able to serve as a public speaker for some years now, and I must admit that very recently, time, was limited, and I was like, come on, AI, and, write me a speech about this, and I was amazed at now who I am. I had to go in and put me back into it, but
Absolutely.
do you think that's a handicap, a benefit? It will help people?
Oh yeah, I'm a huge. I mean, look, I have a new podcast called The Future Is Fun, and we talk about that intersection of business and technology. And so I'm a huge advocate for technology. I do think that there is, with any introduction of technology, there's going to be any number of legal, ethical
abuses of it, and yes.
Yeah, so society kind of has to catch up. But on balance, I think it's a very positive thing because ultimately, what we're moving to a society is a place where we can do more with less. And then ultimately, you can print more money. Nobody's printing more time. Time is the one thing you can't get back. And so, as a society, I believe it's a net positive creatively if I could get speeches. If I can access information.
The research, right?
Yeah, very quickly. Google's mission statement was to essentially organize the world's information. And they did it. Essentially you can Google anything now. But having access to information is not the same as being able to tap into specialized knowledge. And I think that AI is opening the opportunity for people in every industry to be able to get access quickly to specialized and useful knowledge that then could be converted into value for whatever the use case is. So it doesn't, now as a student, I do think and as speakers, we talk about this too, because it's kind of the line of, what draws the line of this is your original work or this is something that AI spit out. And so those are things that we're going to have to grapple with. But on balance, I'm a very big champion of AI, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, metaverse, like anything that's going to, I think as people, we do need to continue to push the cutting edge of competency around the tools that we have available to us if we're going to really maximize our time on this planet.
So just one more question.
Yeah.
Black man from Baltimore, business owner, creating opportunities for the Black community. What are the life lessons that you've learned to date that you feel like you can share with others?
Yeah, I actually keep a few of them on my wall in the form of Brian's reminders. And I always jokingly say, if you're not living life on the edge, you're taking up too much space. But I always jokingly say that, and people are like, but it's true. I think that there are sometimes, again, this isn't a dress rehearsal. This isn't practice. This is real. This is live. You're in the game now, and we don't know how much time we have here. And so sometimes we just have to go for it. I think as an entrepreneur, sometimes we get numb to that because we get so used to being in the mix and putting it all on the line. And when I say all on the line, I just mean hey, it's scary. It's scary to communicate your dreams to the outside world. Nobody wants. What's the thing? Nobody wants to have their baby called ugly or something like that. Nobody. Right. But it's true. So you have to constantly push yourself outside of your comfort zone, and it doesn't have to be as an entrepreneur. that could be as a student, you know, learning new skills, learning a new language, going to different cities, traveling, experiencing new foods, getting around people. And this conversation around equity, I think, is very central to that, because it's impossible to have equity without understanding. And so if you're constantly surrounded by the same people that think the same, you're not exposing yourself to difference, whether you're part of a majority or minority group, it's going to be very hard to find bridges of understanding that are ultimately going to bring people together. So that's one. I think the other thing is, going back to my plane ride, my very first plane ride to Spain, you know, when you get on the plane, they say, you know, if anything happens, oxygen mask drops down, you know, they tell you to do what?
Help yourself first.
Put it on yourself before you try to help
Right.
anybody else, even your kid, like anybody else, because if you go down, you can't help anybody else. So that to me translate, and again, with specific focus to the Black community, the conversation around mental health and just like monitoring our own capacity and burnout, anxiety is real, you know, and so I think that one of my big lessons is you're responsible for essentially monitoring and guarding your own mental health. So whether that's creating barriers, whether it's like we were just talking about this, like blocking out your calendar, doing things that are going to replenish and refill you. Only you know what those limits are, and then you have to like ruthlessly like protect them in order to ensure that you have what you need to actually show up as your best self. So those are two of the biggest lessons I feel like I walk with all the time.
Thank you for that. If you could share with our viewers how to get connected and stay connected with you.
Yeah, well, I always encourage people to Google me because it's super easy. I think that should be a goal to be Googleable, if that's a word. But you can connect with me at Black Speakers Network, of course, blackspeakersnetwork.com. I'm also available on LinkedIn, Brian J. Olds, and ultimately you can find me on pretty much every platform at Brian J. Olds.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the interview, and I'm looking forward to sharing more. And thank you so much for the incredible work that you're doing with ABC. This is an incredibly important platform. You're doing incredibly important work for the community, and I'm looking forward to continuing to support and the full support of Black Speakers Network as well. So thank you.